During a weekend family dinner, my stepmother tossed a nursery blueprint onto my plate and screamed that I either surrender my master bedroom to my younger brother or pack my bags and get out immediately. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I calmly wiped my mouth, packed my belongings, and walked out the door. Less than 72 hours later, I was sipping espresso on the balcony of my new $4 million hillside mansion, watching my phone light up. My family was about to discover that by kicking me out of my own childhood home, they had just triggered a legal trap that would leave them completely bankrupt and begging for my mercy. Before I share how I legally dismantled their perfect lives, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to teach toxic relatives a lesson they will never forget. Growing up as a dark-skinned black woman in a wealthy Atlanta suburb was isolating enough, but feeling like an interloper in my own childhood home was a suffocating kind of pain. This house originally belonged to my biological mother. After she passed away, my father Marcus married Vivian exactly 11 months later. Vivian loved designer labels, high society church galas, and most of all, she loved making sure I knew my place. Her biological son Malik, my half-brother, was instantly elevated to the status of the golden child. I, on the other hand, was treated like an inconvenient ghost haunting her perfect life. The sharp clink of a heavy silver fork, striking expensive porcelain, pierced the thick silence of our dining room. Sunday dinners at my father's house were mandatory. They usually served as a stage for Vivian to parade her latest luxury purchases or brag about Malik to our extended relatives. Tonight, however, the main course was my public humiliation. Without any warning, a rolled-up architectural blueprint slapped against my dinner plate. The sudden impact knocked over my crystal water glass, sending a freezing stream, soaking into the pristine white linen tablecloth and splashing onto my lap. I looked up to see Vivian standing over me. The heavy gold bangles on her wrists clanked together like a warning bell as she crossed her arms over her chest. "Those are the new designs for the nursery," Vivian announced, her voice echoing sharply through the spacious room. "You need to clear out the master bedroom by tomorrow morning. The contractors are coming to knock down the partition wall. Clear out, make space, shrink yourself." The repetitive drumbeat of their demands pounded in my mind. It was a psychological cage they had forced upon me for decades. I slowly wiped the cold water from my lap with a napkin, keeping my hands perfectly steady so they would not see my anger. "That is my bedroom," I said evenly, looking directly into Vivian's hostile eyes. "The one I have personally maintained and paid the property taxes on since I started working." Across the sprawling mahogany table, my 24-year-old half-brother Malik let out a loud, dismissive snort. He did not even bother looking up from his smartphone screen. He wore an oversized designer graphic shirt that I knew my father had financed. "It is just a room," Nia Malik groaned, scrolling through his social media feed. "Stop being so incredibly dramatic. Chloe needs the space more than you do." Chloe, my brother's 23-year-old fiancée, sat nestled tightly beside him. As a blonde, blue-eyed white woman who had married into our affluent black family, she had masterfully perfected the art of weaponizing her own perceived fragility against me. She wore a thin silk dress and frequently deployed subtle microaggressions to put me down. She would casually ask if my natural hair was professional enough for my office job, or suggest that I should change my tone so I did not sound so intimidating. Now she smoothed her hands over her silk dress, resting them on a stomach that was still perfectly flat. She let out a soft theatrical sigh and pushed her plate of untouched food away. "I am so incredibly sorry if this is upsetting you," Nia Chloe murmured. Her voice dripped with that breathy, innocent tone she consistently used to paint me as the aggressive one. "But you know your room gets the absolute best morning sun. My doctor was just warning me about the severe risks of prenatal depression if I do not get enough natural daylight. I am just so incredibly sensitive to my environment right now." Chloe tilted her head, giving me a look of profound, condescending pity that only someone completely blind to their own privilege could muster. "Since you just sit at a desk doing dry accounting work all day," she continued, "I did not think it would be a big deal for you to sacrifice a little light for your future niece or nephew. I mean, you do care about the baby's health, right? It would be so selfish to put your home office needs above a high-risk pregnancy. Sacrifice a little. Give up a little. Disappear a little. This deliberate manipulation was a psychological trap I knew all too well. If I argued, I would instantly be labeled the angry, bitter black woman attacking the delicate, pregnant white girl. If I agreed, I lost my only sanctuary in this toxic household. They truly believed I was nothing but a low-level bookkeeper barely scraping by. They had absolutely no idea that my simple accounting job was actually a meticulously crafted cover. In reality, I was the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Apex, a massive financial technology firm that bought and managed high-risk corporate debt. I was worth tens of millions of dollars, but I played the part of the struggling spinster to keep them out of my bank accounts. My accounting work, I said, leaning forward slightly to hold Chloe's gaze, is what keeps me employed and independent. And your hypothetical prenatal depression risk does not give you the deed to my personal space. Vivian slammed both of her hands onto the table. Do not speak to your sister-in-law with that tone, she screamed. Chloe is carrying the next generation of this family. Malik is about to launch his new technology startup. He needs a peaceful home environment, not a bitter single 32-year-old spinster dragging down the energy of this household. I turned my gaze to my father. Marcus sat at the head of the table staring intensely at his half-eaten steak. He was a man who had long ago traded his backbone for a quiet life with a demanding wife, allowing her to systematically erase every trace of my biological mother from this house. Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous register that demanded his attention. Are you really going to sit there and let them evict me from my own room for a baby that is not even showing yet? Are you going to let her rewrite the rules of this house again? My father finally stopped cutting his meat. He refused to meet my eyes, looking instead at the spilled water pooling on the table. You are 32 years old, Nia. He mumbled, his voice thick with cowardly hesitation. You should have your own family by now, your own house. You are just doing simple bookkeeping for some mid-level firm. You do not need the master suite. Just give them the room. You can move your things down to the basement. Move to the basement. Step into the dark. Stay out of sight. The repetition of his rejections sank deep into my chest. The basement flooded every spring. It had exposed insulation and smelled of damp earth. It was a place for discarded things, which was exactly how they viewed me. It builds character. Malik chimed in, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. Maybe living underground will motivate you to finally get a real career and move out. You are embarrassing my brand anyway. My investors are coming over next week for a dinner party, and having my middle-aged sister lurking around like a permanent charity case is not the aesthetic we are going for. Your brand, I challenged, staring directly into Malik's arrogant eyes. You mean the fake tech startup that has zero revenue, no product, and survives entirely on the cash advances you bully Dad into taking out against the equity of this house? My father gasped loudly. Chloe let out a theatrical little cry, clutching Malik's arm, as if I had physically struck him. Vivian's face contorted with absolute fury, the veins in her neck standing out against her heavy gold jewelry. She grabbed my plate of food and shoved it hard across the table, sending it crashing to the floor, where it shattered into dozens of jagged porcelain pieces. Gravy and roasted vegetables splattered against the expensive Persian rug, but she did not even blink. How dare you disrespect my son under my roof, Vivian shrieked. She pointed a perfectly manicured, trembling finger just inches from my face. You are nothing but a jealous, miserable failure. You have always been jealous of Malik because he has potential and you have nothing. I am sick of looking at your miserable face. I am sick of your attitude. She took a deep, ragged breath, her chest heaving as she delivered her final ultimatum. I am giving you a choice right now. You either pack up your things, surrender that room to Chloe and Malik, and march yourself down to that basement with your mouth shut, or you pack your bags and you get out of my house tonight. The silence in the dining room was absolute. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My father stared at his plate. Malik was smirking. Chloe hid a triumphant little smile behind her hand, her eyes sparkling with malicious victory. They expected me to break. They expected me to cry, to beg, to apologize for stepping out of line. because where else would the poor single low-wage accountant go? I looked at each of their faces, memorizing the exact contours of their arrogance. I felt no fear. I felt no sadness. Instead, a cold, powerful wave of absolute clarity washed over me. I calmly reached for my linen napkin, wiped the corners of my mouth, and placed it neatly on the table. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. I smoothed the front of my dress completely, ignoring the shattered plate and the spilled food at my feet. "You are absolutely right, Vivian," I said. My voice was steady, carrying a quiet authority that wiped the smirk right off Malik's face. "I am done living under this arrangement. I will not be moving to the basement." I locked eyes with my father one last time, watching him shrink under the weight of his own cowardice. "I will be out of this house by tonight." The oak stairs creaked slightly under my weight as I climbed to the second floor. I did not look back at the dining room. I did not need to. I could already hear Vivian's shrill voice echoing from below, loudly celebrating her victory, immediately discussing whether they should tear out the hardwood floors to put down plush carpeting for the new baby. I pushed open the solid wood door to the master suite. This room had been my sanctuary for the last decade. I pulled my hard-shell suitcase from the closet and laid it flat across the mattress, methodically opening the zipper. A soft, hesitant knock tapped against the door frame. I did not bother turning around. I knew exactly who was standing there. Chloe leaned against the trim, her arms crossed protectively over her perfectly flat stomach. She wore an expression of manufactured pity, a look she had perfected to an absolute art form. "I really hate that it had to come to this, Nia," she murmured. Her voice dripped with artificial sweetness. "But you have to admit, keeping this massive room all to yourself was a little selfish. And honestly, looking at all this cheap stuff, you probably do not even have that much to pack. It will not take you long at all." I continued folding my silk blouses, completely ignoring her presence. Silence is often the sharpest weapon against people who desperately crave validation. But Chloe hated being ignored. It ruined the narrative she was trying to build in her own head. She stepped further into my room, her eyes darting over my belongings with undisguised disdain. "Where are you even going to go?" she asked, tilting her head. "Are you moving down to South Atlanta? I heard the rent is cheap down there, but it is just so dangerous. Especially for a single black woman living all alone. You really need to be careful. And you might want to consider straightening your hair or putting it in a protective style. Wearing it so big and natural might attract the wrong kind of attention in those neighborhoods. We would not want you getting mistaken for a thug or something." I stopped folding. I turned to face her, letting my eyes slowly travel from the top of her expensive blonde highlights down to her designer shoes. She shifted uncomfortably under my gaze, her fake smile faltering just a fraction. "My hair," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "is absolutely none of your concern. And frankly, neither is my zip code. You rely on my father to put a roof over your head, and you rely on my brother to pay off your credit cards. Since you are so deeply invested in my financial well-being, you should probably focus more on your own future. Babies are expensive, Chloe. Are you completely sure Malik can afford one?" Chloe gasped, taking a dramatic step back and placing a hand over her chest as if I had physically struck her. "You are just bitter," she whispered defensively. "You are bitter because Malik is going places and you are stuck." "I can afford whatever my family needs," Malik's arrogant voice boomed from the hallway. He strolled into the room, sliding his arm around Chloe's waist and pulling her close in a show of masculine protection. He looked at my half-packed suitcase and laughed aloud. It was a harsh, grating sound that filled the room. "Look at you running away just like a beaten dog. Vivian was right. You never belonged in this house. You have always been dead weight dragging us down." Malik reached into the pocket of his designer jeans, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and flicked it onto my mattress. It fluttered down, landing right on top of my neatly folded clothes. "Take that," he sneered, looking down his nose at me. "Order yourself a premium Uber out of here. I would hate for my future CEO reputation to be ruined because someone saw my half-sister dragging her cheap luggage onto a public bus. Just make sure you are gone before the contractors arrive tomorrow morning. I do not want you getting in their way." A future CEO. The absolute delusion was almost comical. Malik had spent the last 2 years draining our father's retirement accounts to fund a technology startup that did not even have a working prototype. He attended networking parties, bought expensive clothes, and leased luxury cars, all on Marcus's rapidly diminishing credit. He was playing a highly dangerous game of financial roulette. He thought he was outsmarting the system, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the very system he was trying to outsmart. Keep your money, Malik, I said, not even glancing at the bill on the bed. You are going to need every single cent of it when your fake tech company officially collapses. How are those investor meetings going, by the way? Has anyone actually agreed to fund a platform that exists entirely in your imagination? Malik's face flushed a deep, angry red. The veins in his neck popped as he stepped aggressively toward me. Chloe held him back, playing the innocent peacemaker, whispering for him to calm down for the sake of the baby. I have highly interested venture capitalists coming to this very house next week, Malik snapped, pointing a trembling finger at my face. They are going to inject $2 million into my company. Dad believes in me. He knows I am the real legacy of this family. So do not ever call my business fake. When I am sitting on the board of a Fortune 500 company, do not come crawling back here begging for a handout. You are completely dead to me. I would rather freeze on the streets than ask you for a dime, I replied. I maintained unbroken eye contact until he finally looked away, unable to match my intensity. Malik scoffed, grabbed Chloe's hand, and pulled her toward the hallway. Come on, babe, he muttered loud enough for me to hear. Let her pack her trash in peace. We need to start picking out paint colors for the baby. Chloe shot me one last look of triumphant pity before disappearing down the hall. I listened to their footsteps fade away, followed by the muffled sounds of Vivian's laughter drifting up from the kitchen below. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully purged the family scapegoat and secured their kingdom forever. They believed that pushing me out the door was their ultimate victory. I turned back to my suitcase. I did not touch the $100 bill lying on my clothes. Instead, I walked over to the far wall of my bedroom. Hanging right above the heavy oak dresser was a large framed abstract painting. It was a beautiful piece I had purchased years ago with my very first significant bonus from Vanguard Apex. I reached out, gripped the edges of the heavy wooden frame, and lifted it off the wall, setting it gently on the floor. Behind the painting set, flush into the drywall, was a sleek biometric wall safe. I placed my thumb against the scanner. A soft beep echoed through the quiet room, and the heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, sitting neatly on the velvet-lined shelf, was a thick leather-bound folder sealed with a heavy red legal stamp. I pulled the folder out, feeling the substantial weight of the documents inside. I ran my fingers over the embossed red seal. This was not just a piece of paper, this was a loaded weapon. This was the original, unalterable trust document established by my biological mother before her sudden death. The document that explicitly dictated the terms of ownership for this entire estate. My father, Marcus, only held a life estate on this property. He had the right to live here and pay the taxes, but that right came with one absolute non-negotiable condition. The condition clearly stated that he retained those rights only as long as I was permitted to reside in the home peacefully and voluntarily. The moment I was forced out, the moment my residency was involuntarily terminated, his life estate was instantly revoked. By giving me an ultimatum to leave tonight, Vivian and Marcus had just legally evicted themselves. They had just handed me full uncontested ownership of the entire property. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression that did not reach my eyes. I placed the leather folder carefully into the bottom of my suitcase, zipping it securely shut. The game had just changed, and they did not even realize the board had been flipped. I dragged my hard-shell suitcase down the polished hardwood stairs, the heavy wheels bumping rhythmically against each step. The sound echoed through the hallway, but it was easily drowned out by the noise coming from the dining room. I could hear Vivian and Chloe excitedly planning nursery colors, loudly debating between sage green and pale yellow, completely oblivious to the magnitude of my departure. They were celebrating a victory that was entirely imaginary. When I reached the grand entryway, my father Marcus was waiting by the heavy oak front door. He held a large black umbrella in his hands, shifting his weight nervously from one foot to the other. His shoulders were slumped, his posture radiating the pathetic energy of a man who had surrendered his authority a long time ago. As I approached, he extended his trembling hand, offering me the umbrella. It was a silent, cowardly apology for failing to protect his own daughter once again. Before I could even reach out to take the handle, Vivian marched out from the dining room. Her heavy footsteps announced her arrival before she even spoke. She lunged forward and yanked the umbrella right out of his grip, nearly knocking him off balance. "She does not need our charity," Vivian snapped, glaring at me with undisguised contempt. "She is a strong, independent woman, remember. She can weather a little rain. Do not waste a good umbrella on someone who disrespects this family." My father dropped his empty hand to his side, staring fixedly at the marble floor. He did not say a single word in my defense. He just let her humiliate me, just like he had done every single day since my biological mother passed away. I did not look at him with anger, only with profound pity. I turned away, grasped the brass handle of the front door, and pulled it open, stepping out into the damp, chilly evening. A steady, miserable drizzle was falling from the dark Atlanta sky, coating the expansive brick driveway in a slick, reflective sheen. I walked down the path, letting the cool rain wash over my face and soak into the shoulders of my silk dress. I did not rush. I walked with my head held high, approaching my car parked at the very edge of the property. It was a 10-year-old beat-up Honda Civic with a dented rear bumper and paint that was severely fading under the Georgia sun. This car was my ultimate masterpiece of deception. For years, Vivian and Malik had pointed to this vehicle as undeniable physical proof of my absolute failure in life. They mocked it relentlessly at every family gathering. They complained that parking it in their driveway lowered their property value. They were entirely unaware that this cheap, reliable piece of metal was the perfect camouflage. It was a strategic shield designed to keep their greedy, grasping hands completely off my actual wealth. I threw my heavy suitcase into the trunk, slammed the lid shut, and climbed into the driver's seat. The worn fabric of the seat was familiar and comforting. I wiped the rainwater from my forehead and turned the key in the ignition. The old engine sputtered for a second before roaring to life, a stark contrast to the quiet purr of the luxury vehicles parked in the garage behind me. I tapped the digital screen on my dashboard, connecting my phone to the encrypted Bluetooth system. I dialed my executive assistant, Maya. She answered on the very first ring, her voice crisp and highly professional despite the late hour. "Good evening," Maya said. "How did the mandatory Sunday family dinner go?" "Exactly as projected," I said, shifting the car into gear and pulling out of the driveway without a single backward glance. I watched the sprawling red brick house disappear in my rearview mirror. "Tell our real estate broker that I am officially closing on the Buckhead Hillside mansion. Wire the $4.5 million in cash from my private offshore account first thing tomorrow morning. I do not want any financing delays. I want the keys in my hand by noon." "Consider it done," Maya replied without missing a beat, the sound of her typing rapidly echoing over the line. "The seller has already agreed to the cash terms. Are we proceeding with phase 2 of the corporate restructuring regarding the family assets as well?" "Yes," I confirmed, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I merged onto the main road, leaving the affluent, toxic suburban neighborhood far behind me. It is time to end this pathetic act. They finally took the bait and crossed the legal line. "I will have the legal team prepare the eviction and asset seizure notices immediately," Maya stated. "Have a good night, boss." I disconnected the call and drove steadily through the rain. My phone buzzed loudly in the cover, the screen lighting up the dark interior of the car. I pulled over into a brightly lit gas station parking lot to check the notification safely. It was a message from the family group chat. It was a chat they had aggressively forced me to stay in for years, solely so they could parade their superficial achievements and expensive vacations in front of me. The message was from Vivian. "Finally cleared out the trash. Calling the contractors first thing tomorrow morning to knock down her bedroom wall and expand the space for Chloe's baby room. Good riddance." Immediately below her message, Malik replied with 3 laughing face emojis. Chloe added a heart emoji and typed, "I cannot wait to start picking out the new imported wallpaper. It is going to look so incredibly chic now that we have all this extra space to breathe." I stared at the glowing screen, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. They were so desperately eager to destroy my space and erase my memory from that house. They were completely and utterly unaware that their arrogant actions had just triggered an explosive financial landmine. I closed the messaging application and opened my proprietary banking software. It was a highly secure network built exclusively for Vanguard Apex executives, shielded by multiple layers of encryption. I bypassed the standard login screen using my biometric facial recognition and a secondary passcode to access the master administrative accounts. I navigated straight to the specific portfolio containing my father's property deeds and active credit lines. It took only a few swipes to pull up the exact file I needed. There it was glowing on the screen in bright red numbers, the home equity line of credit that Marcus had secretly and fraudulently taken out against the house years ago. It was the exact same credit line that Malik had been aggressively draining for the last 12 months to fund his fake technology lifestyle, lease his luxury cars, and buy Chloe those ridiculous designer bags she loved to flaunt. They had leveraged the house to the absolute maximum limit, treating the equity like a bottomless automated teller machine. When Marcus had originally gone to the bank for that loan, he had hidden the trust documents. When the bank eventually discovered the high-risk nature of the loan and his terrible payment history, they bundled it and sold it off to a debt collection agency. That agency was Vanguard Apex, my company. I owned their debt. I owned their financial future. I tapped on the active account status. A prompt appeared on the screen asking for authorization to alter the critical account parameters. I typed in my unique executive override code. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute power resting at my fingertips, and pressed the red button labeled Freeze Trust Assets. The screen loaded for a brief second before flashing a bright solid green. Account suspended, funds locked, access denied. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and pulled the car back onto the wet highway. I drove straight toward my luxurious new life on the hillside, feeling lighter than I had in over a decade. I turned up the radio, letting the music wash over me as I cruised through the Atlanta night. Tomorrow morning, Malik was going to walk into a luxury car dealership and try to swipe a piece of plastic that was absolutely worthless. Tomorrow morning, Vivian was going to try to pay her expensive contractors with funds that no longer existed. Tomorrow morning, their entire financial reality was going to crash down around them, and they had absolutely no one to blame but themselves. The morning sun broke over the Atlanta skyline, casting a brilliant golden hue across the surface of my new infinity pool. The water seemed to merge seamlessly with the horizon, a perfect reflection of the limitless control I now held over my own life. I stood on the expansive terrace of my Buckhead mansion, wrapping a heavy emerald green silk robe tightly around my shoulders. The crisp morning air felt incredibly refreshing. I turned and walked back inside through the sliding glass doors, heading straight for the massive chef's kitchen. I prepared a double shot of espresso using a commercial-grade machine, inhaling the rich, bitter aroma of the dark roast. For the first time in 32 years, I was waking up in a home where no one could tell me to shrink, to quiet down, or to apologize for my mere existence. I carried my steaming ceramic mug into my private home office. The room was a command center designed for absolute financial warfare. A custom-built, reclaimed walnut desk dominated the center of the space, supporting 6 curved high-definition monitors that were already glowing with streaming data. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and woke the system. Vivian and Chloe thought I was a low-wage number cruncher who spent her days staring at dry spreadsheets in a cubicle. They had absolutely no idea what a forensic accountant actually did. I did not just balance ledgers. I was an apex predator in the financial sector. I tracked hidden offshore accounts, exposed corporate embezzlement, and hunted down toxic debt. 5 years ago, I had used that specialized knowledge to quietly found Vanguard Apex. My company specialized in purchasing high-risk, defaulted loans for pennies on the dollar, giving me the unilateral legal authority to seize properties, freeze assets, and liquidate businesses across the entire East Coast. While my family was busy buying designer clothes to look wealthy, I had been busy buying the very banks that owned their debt. I took a slow sip of my espresso and picked up my personal smartphone. I tapped open Instagram. I did not even have to search for it. Chloe's account was at the very top of my feed, practically begging for attention. She had posted a new story just 10 minutes ago. I tapped her profile picture. The video began playing immediately. The camera panned wildly around what used to be my bedroom. The heavy oak dresser was gone. My custom bookshelves had been ripped from the walls. A burly contractor wearing a dusty tool belt swung a massive sledgehammer directly into the pale blue drywall. A loud, destructive crunch echoed through my phone speaker as a massive chunk of plaster crashed to the floor, exposing the wooden framing underneath. Chloe flipped the camera to show her own face. She was wearing an expensive athleisure set, pouting her lips at the lens, while resting one hand on a stomach that was completely flat. Finally cleansing this house of its toxic, bitter energy, Chloe whispered into the camera, using that same breathy, fragile voice she weaponized against me at the dinner table. Out with the old negativity. We are making room for our little blessing. Baby needs good vibes and lots of natural sunlight only. I watched the video loop 3 times. I felt a brief, fleeting pang of nostalgia for the room that had sheltered me during my darkest days. But that emotion was instantly incinerated by a hot, bright wave of vindictive satisfaction. Let them swing their sledgehammers. Let them tear down the drywall and rip up the flooring. They were joyfully vandalizing a property they no longer legally possessed. They were increasing my property value while destroying their own legal standing. I swiped to the next story. Malik had commented on Chloe's video. Got my queen something incredibly special today. Stay tuned. I set my phone face down on the walnut desk and turned my attention to my central monitor. I knew exactly what Malik meant by something special. 15 miles away in the heart of the luxury shopping district, Malik was currently strutting across the pristine, polished showroom floor of Porsche Atlanta Perimeter. I could easily picture the exact swagger in his step. He was wearing those ridiculous, oversized designer sneakers, acting like a Silicon Valley billionaire who had just sold his company for a fortune. He would be treating the dealership staff like his personal servants, loudly boasting about his non-existent technology startup to anyone forced to listen. How was there to buy a push present for a baby that was nothing more than a manipulative lie? Chloe had convinced him that a high-risk pregnancy required the safety and prestige of a brand-new, fully loaded Porsche Cayenne. And Malik, desperate to maintain the illusion of his own immense success, was more than happy to oblige. He sat at a sleek glass desk in the finance office, swirling sparkling water in a crystal glass, while the exhausted salesman typed up the final purchase agreement. The total came to $150,000, factoring in the premium leather upgrades, the customized paint job, and the completely unnecessary performance packages Malik had arrogantly demanded. The salesman turned the monitor toward Malik, pointing to the final purchase amount. "How will you be settling the down payment today, sir?" the salesman asked politely, though internally he was likely praying for the transaction to just be over. Malik smiled, a slick, greasy expression of unearned confidence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy, matte black metal credit card. He tossed it onto the glass desk with a loud metallic clink. He expected the salesman to be impressed. He expected the entire room to look at him with awe and reverence. "Run the whole thing on this," Malik commanded, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. That card was tied directly to the home equity line of credit on my father's house. It was a line of credit that Marcus had secretly and fraudulently opened years ago, hiding the transactions behind a maze of shell accounts to avoid triggering the trust fund alarms. Marcus had leveraged the family home to the absolute brink of foreclosure, treating the equity like a bottomless personal ATM. When the original bank realized the massive risk profile of Marcus's terrible payment history, they bundled that debt and sold it off to a third-party collection agency. That agency was Vanguard Apex. Back in my hillside mansion, a sharp crimson-red alert box suddenly materialized in the very center of my main monitor. The proprietary tracking software I had personally coded was flashing frantically. High-value transaction attempted. Origin Porsche, Atlanta Perimeter. Amount $150,000. Source Marcus Trust Equity Line. I stared at the glowing red numbers on my screen. The trap I had patiently laid out was finally springing shut. Malik was attempting to drain the last remaining drop of blood from a stone that was already crumbling into dust. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the bank would just blindly approve another massive charge because his father had always managed to smooth things over in the past. I placed my hands on my mechanical keyboard. The keys clicked sharply in the quiet office as I accessed the master administrative override panel. I did not just hit the button to decline the transaction. A simple decline would just make Malik think there was a temporary banking error. I needed him to feel the immediate devastating impact of his actions. I needed to cut the oxygen line to his entire fake lifestyle. I initiated a complete, irreversible cascade freeze. I locked the primary home equity line of credit. I suspended the secondary credit cards tied to Marcus's name. I placed a hard hold on the joint checking accounts Vivian used to pay her expensive contractors. I systematically shut down every single financial avenue that family possessed in a matter of seconds. I pressed the enter key to confirm the massive execution command. The crimson warning box on my screen vanished, instantly replaced by a solid neon green confirmation banner. Accounts suspended. All assets frozen. Legal eviction protocol triggered. I leaned back in my leather chair, taking another slow, deeply satisfying sip of my espresso. The coffee tasted absolutely incredible. At the dealership, the salesman picked up Malik's heavy black card. He swiped it through the card reader on his desk. The machine processed for 3 long seconds. Malik checked his reflection in his phone screen, adjusting his collar, completely ready to drive his new luxury vehicle off the lot. A harsh, discordant beep erupted from the card reader. The screen flashed bright red. The salesman frowned, his polite customer service smile faltering just a bit. "I am sorry, sir," the salesman said, wiping the magnetic strip on his sleeve. "It looks like we had a minor read error. Let me just try running that one more time." He swiped the card again. Beep, declined. Malik rolled his eyes, letting out a loud, dramatic sigh of extreme annoyance. "Your machine is clearly broken, man. Run it again or input the numbers manually. Do you have any idea how much money is in that account? I am trying to give you a massive commission here. Do not make me take my business to another dealership." The salesman typed the 16-digit card number directly into his terminal. He pressed enter. The terminal froze for a second, communicating directly with the Vanguard Apex servers. Then the machine let out 3 rapid, aggressive beeps. The salesman stared at his monitor, his eyes widening in complete shock. He slowly turned the computer screen around so Malik could read the bright red text glaring back at him. "I am very sorry, sir," the salesman said, his voice dropping to a low, uncomfortable whisper, so the other customers would not hear. "The bank is not just declining the charge. They are indicating that this entire account has been permanently suspended due to fraudulent activity. In fact, the system is prompting me to confiscate this card immediately." Malik froze. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face, instantly replaced by a look of absolute, unadulterated panic. He stared at the word suspended flashing on the screen, his mind completely unable to process the fact that his unlimited gravy train had just violently derailed. He reached out to snatch the card back, but the salesman quickly pulled it out of his reach. "That is a mistake," Malik stammered, his voice cracking loudly in the quiet showroom. "That has to be a system error. My father is wealthy. I am wealthy. Give me my card back right now." "I am sorry, sir," the salesman repeated, his tone now completely devoid of any warmth. "I cannot do that. I am going to have to ask you to leave the showroom." Malik stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the polished tile floor. People turned to stare at him. The wealthy, successful technology founder was suddenly exposed as nothing more than a broke, desperate fraud, throwing a temper tantrum in the middle of a luxury dealership. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands, desperately dialing Marcus's number. I sat in my mansion watching the data flow across my screens, fully aware that the financial slaughter had only just begun. My personal smartphone vibrated violently against the reclaimed walnut wood of my desk. The caller ID flashed Vivian's name in bold, angry letters. I let it ring 3 times, allowing her anxiety to marinate in the silence of the morning before tapping the green icon and placing the call on speakerphone. "What exactly did you do to our bank accounts?" Vivian did not even bother to say hello. Her voice was a shrill, hysterical shriek, completely devoid of the polished high society church lady persona she usually wore like armor. Behind her frantic screaming, I could hear the rhythmic, heavy thuds of the contractors swinging their sledgehammers into the drywall of my old bedroom. Each loud crash was music to my ears. They were joyfully dismantling a room in a house they no longer had any legal right to occupy. Malik is stranded at the Porsche dealership, looking like an absolute fool, Vivian screamed, her breath hitching with genuine panic. The financing company told him the family equity line was flagged for massive fraud. He had to take a public bus home. The general contractor is standing in my hallway right now, demanding a $30,000 wire transfer before he tears down the rest of the partition wall. I tried to log into the portal, but every single one of our joint checking accounts is locked. You did this. I know you did this. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the smooth leather cool against my skin. It sounds like you are having a very stressful morning, Vivian, I said calmly. Perhaps Chloe needs to take some deep breaths, so the baby does not feel all that negative energy. You would not want to trigger her prenatal depression, would you? Do not you dare play psychological games with me, Nia Vivian snarled. Her voice grew louder, and I could hear the distinct sound of her pacing rapidly across the hardwood floors. I know you work in accounting. I know you called the bank and made up some pathetic jealous lie to get our accounts frozen because you are mad. We kicked you out last night. You are nothing but a vindictive, bitter woman trying to ruin your brother's success. I am going to have your father call the bank president right now and get you arrested for financial sabotage. Your father is the sole owner of this property. You are nothing but a freeloader living under his roof. A freeloader. I repeated the word slowly, letting it echo in my spacious, quiet office. Vivian, in the 10 years you have been sleeping in my dead mother's bedroom, acting like the queen of a castle you never built, did you ever once bother to actually read the property deed? The line went silent for a fraction of a second. What are you talking about? Vivian demanded, though her voice had lost a fraction of its arrogant edge. Marcus bought this house. We have the mortgage statements. Marcus did not buy anything. I corrected her, my voice dropping to a cold surgical precision. My biological mother purchased that property entirely in cash before she ever met your husband. When she got sick, she placed the house into a highly secure, irrevocable trust. She knew exactly what kind of weak, easily manipulated man my father was. And she knew he would eventually bring a woman exactly like you into our home. A woman who would try to erase her legacy. The trust explicitly dictates that Marcus was only granted a life estate. I could hear Marcus muttering something in the background of the call, his voice frantic and muffled. Vivian snapped at him to shut up before returning to the phone. A life estate means he owns it for life, you stupid girl, Vivian argued, clinging desperately to her ignorance. It means he controls the equity, and he can borrow against it whenever he wants to support this family. A life estate means he has the right to occupy the property and pay the property taxes, I explained, savoring the absolute destruction I was about to unleash. That is the full extent of his power. He never owned the principal equity. But more importantly, Vivian, my mother's lawyers, added one specific non-negotiable contingency to his residency. Marcus was allowed to maintain his life estate only, under the strict condition that I, her biological daughter, was never subjected to an involuntary eviction. My right to peaceful, undisturbed residency completely superseded his right to occupy the property. The sledgehammers in the background suddenly stopped. I imagined Vivian frantically waving her hands at the contractors, realizing that she was paying men to destroy walls she did not own. You are lying, Vivian hissed through the speaker. Her breathing became shallow and ragged. The absolute terror in her voice betrayed her false bravado. We are your parents. We make the rules in this house. You voluntarily packed your bags and left last night because you were too selfish to share. You made the rules in a house you never owned, I countered. And last night you got sloppy. You got reckless with your arrogance. You took my father's phone and you sent a message to the family group chat. You explicitly bragged about kicking me out and clearing out the trash. You documented your hostile intent in writing. That digital footprint, combined with the physical demolition you authorized this morning, legally constitutes an involuntary eviction. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. I let the crushing weight of reality press down on her chest before I delivered the final blow. By sending that text and swinging those hammers, you breached the foundational clause of the federal trust. Marcus's life estate was officially voided at midnight last night. You do not have a home equity line of credit because you do not have any equity to borrow against. The house belongs entirely 100% to me. You are currently standing inside my property ordering unauthorized demolition and trespassing. A strangled, breathless gasp escaped Vivian's throat. Nia, she stammered, her voice suddenly shrinking into a pathetic, trembling whisper. Nia, please. You cannot do this. We have nowhere else to go. Chloe is pregnant. Malik needs his business funds. We are family. We stopped being family the moment you threw my plate on the floor and told me to move to a flooded basement. I replied, my tone devoid of any sympathy or hesitation. I reached out and typed a quick command into my keyboard, pulling up the digital dispatch manifest for my legal team. My legal representatives have already filed the necessary paperwork with the county courthouse, I informed her. Your financial accounts remain frozen because the bank has finally realized the collateral they secured those loans against no longer belongs to the borrower. You committed financial fraud, Vivian. And right now, the only thing standing between you and a criminal indictment is my patience. I suggest you tell your contractors to pack up their tools immediately. I did not wait for her to formulate another pathetic excuse. I reached out and disconnected the call, cutting off her frantic apologies mid-sentence. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, feeling an immense, profound sense of justice. The first pillar of their fraudulent empire had just been smashed to dust. They wanted to see what kind of power I held, and I had just given them a front-row seat to their own financial execution. I did not step away from my desk. The adrenaline of dismantling Vivian's false reality was potent, but my work was far from over. I closed the property deed file and pulled up a blank forensic financial tracing module on my central monitor. If Vivian thought the frozen equity line was the extent of the damage, she grossly underestimated the relentless thoroughness of a forensic accountant. I turned my attention directly to Malik. I ran his social security number and the supposed corporate tax identification number he loved to brag about at Sunday dinners. The results populated my curved monitors in rapid, damning succession. I cross-referenced the raw data with the banking records I had just frozen. What I found was an absolute financial bloodbath. Malik did not own a technology startup. There was no proprietary software in development, no payroll records, and absolutely no legitimate investor backing. His entire corporate identity was a poorly constructed shell company registered to a cheap strip mall mailbox. I traced the outgoing wire transfers from the family equity line. Malik had not just been buying designer sneakers and funding Chloe's extravagant spa days. He had been hemorrhaging hundreds of thousands of dollars into highly volatile, unregulated cryptocurrency markets, desperately trying to day trade his way into actual wealth. When the crypto market inevitably crashed, taking his stolen funds with it, Malik had panicked. The digital ledger showed a series of massive, frantic incoming deposits from shell companies that were well known to Vanguard Apex. They were fronts for predatory high-interest private lenders, loan sharks. Malik had taken out massive illegal street loans to cover his crypto losses and maintain Chloe's illusion of high society living. Worse, he had forged Marcus's signature to pledge the house as collateral to these dangerous individuals. He had bet a house he did not own on a market he did not understand. I needed to see the immediate fallout. 5 years ago, after a string of burglaries in their affluent neighborhood, I had personally paid for and installed a state-of-the-art smart home security system for my father. Because I paid the monthly subscription out of my own pocket, the administrative access and live camera feeds were still linked directly to my master email account. They were so technologically incompetent, they had never bothered to change the passwords. I opened a new tab on my monitor and activated the live audio and video feed from the dining room camera. The high-definition feed loaded, instantly displaying a scene of absolute unhinged chaos. The shattered porcelain from my dinner plate was still scattered across the expensive Persian rug. Malik was pacing frantically back and forth, violently pulling at his hair. His expensive designer shirt was wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. Chloe was sitting on the hardwood floor, surrounded by her luxury shopping bags, performing an Oscar-worthy emotional breakdown. She was weeping loudly, clutching her perfectly flat stomach, her face buried in her hands. I cannot believe you embarrassed me like this. Malik. Chloe wailed, her voice echoing clearly through the camera feed. You told me we were rich. You told me I was going to be a wealthy technology wife. I had to take a public rideshare from the dealership. The driver did not even speak English. Do you know how stressful that is for my body? My heart is racing. I left my comfortable, safe life for you, and my parents warned me about getting involved in your family's ghetto financial drama. I am carrying your child, and you cannot even buy me a simple luxury vehicle to keep us safe. This environment is highly toxic for my pregnancy. She leveraged her white tears flawlessly, instantly transforming herself into the ultimate victim while throwing deeply racist microaggressions right in their faces. And instead of defending himself, Malik just stood there looking absolutely terrified. Vivian was screaming at both of them, her arms flailing wildly in the air. How could you let your card get declined in public? She shrieked at Malik, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. The entire dealership staff saw you. You made us look like broke trash. What are my friends at the country club going to say when they find out my son was thrown out of a Porsche dealership? Then Vivian turned her wrath entirely on my father. Marcus sat slumped in a dining chair, holding his head in his hands, looking like a man who had just watched his entire universe implode. This is your daughter's doing, Vivian screamed, shoving Marcus hard in the shoulder. Nia is out there trying to destroy your son. She works in accounting. She probably hacked the bank to freeze the funds because she is jealous of Chloe's baby. Call her right now. Make her fix this banking error, or I swear to God I will divorce you and take half of everything you own. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Vivian was aggressively threatening to take half of a completely bankrupt estate that was currently drowning in illegal street debt. I watched the live feed as Marcus slowly pulled his cell phone from his pocket. His hands were shaking so violently, he almost dropped the device. He looked like a hollow, broken shell of a man. Seconds later, my private cell phone began to ring on my desk. I muted the security feed audio and answered the call, leaning comfortably back in my leather chair. Nia, my father, whispered into the phone. His voice was stripped of all the fake authority he had tried to project the night before. It was weak, raspy, and thoroughly pathetic. Nia, please, you have to stop this. I do not know what kind of computer hacking you did at your firm, but you have to call the bank and reverse it. Malik is in serious trouble. The contractors are downstairs threatening to sue us for breach of contract. Vivian is having a severe panic attack. Just undo whatever you did, please. I did not hack anything, Dad. I replied, my voice a smooth, icy calm that sliced right through his panic. I simply enforced the law. Malik committed wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. He forged your personal signature to take out illegal street loans. Your golden boy is hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to people who break legs for a living. Not to mention the fact that he completely drained the equity of a house you do not even own to buy cryptocurrency. I could hear Marcus gasping for air on the other end of the line, his breath hitching as the devastating reality of his son's crimes washed over him. But instead of showing outrage at Malik's betrayal, Marcus defaulted to his usual spineless behavior. Please, he begged, completely ignoring the massive felonies his son had just committed against him. Please, Nia. You are his older sister. You have to spare him. You have the skills to fix the accounting numbers. He made some foolish mistakes, but he is just a young man trying to build a family. You cannot ruin his entire life over a little bit of money. He is about to be a father. You cannot do this to an innocent, unborn child. Chloe is so fragile right now, the stress might cause a miscarriage. You cannot be this cruel to your own family. I let a harsh, unforgiving laugh slip through my lips. The sound echoed through the phone line, instantly silencing his pathetic whimpering. While I was digging through Malik's financial statements to track the loan sharks, I had noticed a very peculiar repeating charge on the credit card he shared with Chloe. It was a charge to a novelty prank website, followed by multiple purchases at a high-end liquor store and subscriptions to a rigorous online waist training corset company. Things a pregnant woman would absolutely never buy. I had pulled the receipts. An innocent child, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine blade. Dad, your entire household is built on a pathetic foundation of cheap, desperate lies. If you are so incredibly worried about your fragile, precious daughter-in-law and her delicate pregnancy, Why do not you go downstairs into the dining room right now and ask her a simple question? Ask her if she is actually pregnant or if she bought that fake customized ultrasound paper on the internet for exactly $50. I disconnected the call and let my phone drop onto the smooth walnut surface of my desk. I immediately turned my full attention back to the high-definition security feed streaming across my central monitor. The audio was crystal clear. Inside the dining room of the house they had just kicked me out of, a heavy, suffocating silence had descended. Marcus slowly lowered his smartphone from his ear. His hand was trembling so violently that the device nearly slipped from his grasp. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He looked like a man who had just been forcefully awakened from a decade-long coma, only to realize the hospital was actively burning to the ground around him. Marcus, what is wrong? Chloe asked. She leaned forward in her chair, batting her eyelashes, and placing a perfectly manicured hand over her flat stomach. Her voice was dripping with that same manufactured breathy concern she always used to manipulate the men in this family. What did that awful bitter girl say to upset you so much? You really need to protect your blood pressure. Marcus did not answer her. He did not even look at her. Instead, he slowly turned his head and stared at the kitchen doorway. Without a single word, he pushed his chair back. The wooden legs scraped harshly against the floorboards. He walked out of the dining room with a stiff, mechanical gait. I quickly tapped my keyboard, switching the live video feed from the dining room camera to the kitchen camera. Marcus stood in the center of the kitchen, breathing heavily. He stared at the large stainless steel trash can sitting near the pantry. For a moment he hesitated, his pride battling against the terrifying seed of doubt I had just planted in his mind. Then desperation took over. He dropped to his knees right there on the pristine tile floor. He pulled the lid off the trash can and began tearing through the garbage with his bare hands. He pushed aside coffee grounds, discarded packaging, and crumpled paper towels. He was digging frantically, a man searching for the exact mechanism of his own destruction. Then his hands stopped moving. He slowly pulled a small, crumpled pharmacy bag from the bottom of the bin. He reached inside and pulled out a flat rectangular object. He held it up to the harsh kitchen lighting. It was a pink blister pack of daily birth control pills. It was a brand new pack, but the first row of pills had already been meticulously popped out and consumed. The prescription label, printed clearly on the front of the pharmacy bag, bore the name Chloe Evans. I watched through the camera as the last remaining shred of Marcus's dignity evaporated. He had sacrificed his relationship with his biological daughter, mortgaged his future, and tolerated constant disrespect, all to protect a legacy that did not even exist. He stood up, clutching the blister pack in his fist so tightly his knuckles turned white. I switched the camera feed back to the dining room just as he walked back in. Vivian was in the middle of ranting about how my accounting firm must have made a mistake, but she stopped mid-sentence when she saw the look on her husband's face. Marcus walked straight up to Chloe. He did not yell. He did not scream. He simply opened his hand and dropped the pink blister pack of birth control pills right onto the center of the mahogany table, landing exactly where my dinner plate had shattered the night before. "What is this?" Marcus asked. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that sent a visible shiver down Malik's spine. Chloe stared at the pills. For a split second, pure panic flashed across her blue eyes. But Chloe was a master manipulator. She instantly tried to default back to her white fragility playbook. "I do not know what that is." Chloe stammered, her lower lip trembling as she looked up at Malik with wide, watery eyes. "Malik, your father is going through my personal trash. That is a massive invasion of my privacy. I feel incredibly unsafe right now. You need to defend me." Malik stood up, puffing out his chest to play the role of the protective alpha male. "Dad, what is wrong with you?" Malik demanded. "Why are you digging through the garbage like a crazy person? Chloe is carrying your grandchild. Show some respect." "She is not carrying anything!" Marcus roared, finally losing the last thread of his composure. He pointed a shaking finger at the pills. "I just found her daily birth control hidden at the bottom of the kitchen trash. She has been taking them every single day. She is not pregnant. There is no baby." Malik froze. The false bravado melted right off his face. He looked down at the pink blister pack, then slowly turned his head to look at Chloe. The reality of the situation was crashing into his arrogant brain like a freight train. Chloe Malik whispered, his voice cracking. Tell me he is lying. Tell me this is just a misunderstanding. Where is the ultrasound picture you showed me last week? Chloe looked at Malik. She looked at the pills. She looked at Vivian, who was standing there with her mouth hanging open in absolute shock. The cornered animal realizes it has no escape route. And when people like Chloe realize their victim act is no longer working, they instantly drop the mask and reveal the sheer ugliness hiding underneath. Chloe stopped crying. The trembling lower lip vanished. She sat back in her chair, crossed her arms over her chest, and let out a loud, mocking laugh. You actually thought I would ruin my body to have a baby with you, Chloe sneered, looking Malik up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Are you completely delusional? The entire room gasped. Vivian took a step back, clutching her chest. Malik looked like he had just been physically gutted. You needed an excuse to get that miserable sister of yours out of the master bedroom, and you needed an excuse to squeeze more cash out of your pathetic father, Chloe said, her voice dripping with venom. I gave you exactly what you wanted. You got the big room, you got the sympathy, you got to play the big, successful family man. Do not stand there and act like a victim when you have been lying to everyone about your fake technology company for 2 years. Shut your mouth! Malik shouted, his voice pitching high with humiliation. I gave you everything. I bought you designer bags. I leased you luxury cars. I just went to buy you a Porsche today. With what money? Chloe fired back, standing up and closing the distance between them. With the credit cards that just got declined in front of the entire dealership. You are a fraud, Malik. You are a broke, desperate fraud trying to play dress up. My parents warned me about getting involved with your kind. They told me you were just a failed black man trying to punch above his weight class, using my aesthetic to make yourself look legitimate to your fake investors. You needed me on your arm to look like you belonged in high society. You have absolutely nothing. You are nothing. The racial microaggressions were no longer hidden behind sweet smiles and fake concern. She was wielding her privilege like a weapon, cutting directly into the deepest insecurities of a man who had sold his soul for proximity to whiteness. She was stripping away every ounce of his false superiority, confirming every terrible thing his own internalized racism had ever told him. Malik let out a primal, guttural scream of absolute rage. His entire ego had just been publicly shredded by the woman he had treated like a trophy. He lunged across the table, his hands reaching out aggressively toward Chloe's neck. He never made contact. Vivian, driven by pure maternal panic, threw herself directly into the line of fire. She crashed into Malik, shoving him backward with all her might. She was not trying to protect Chloe. She was trying to protect her golden boy from catching an assault charge against a white woman in an affluent Atlanta suburb, knowing full well the police would not hesitate to destroy him. Get off her! Vivian shrieked, slapping Malik hard on the chest to push him back. Do not you dare lay a hand on her. You will go to prison and ruin your life over this trash. Vivian spun around and faced Chloe, her eyes blazing with a terrifying maternal fury. Get out of my house, Vivian screamed, pointing toward the front door. Pack whatever cheap garbage you brought into this family and get out before I call the police and have you arrested for fraud. You lied about a pregnancy to extort money from my husband. You are a disgusting, manipulative gold digger. I am a gold digger? Chloe laughed, grabbing her expensive purse from the back of her chair. That is rich coming from the woman who married a widower, just to secure a zip code. Good luck paying for this house without my credit score backing up your fraudulent loans. I am leaving, and I am taking the diamond ring you fools paid for. The house had completely devolved into a circus of dysfunction. Malik was punching the walls, screaming obscenities and sobbing at the same time. Vivian was shouting at Chloe, calling her every terrible name in the book. Marcus was standing in the middle of the room, completely paralyzed, watching the family. He had sacrificed his own daughter for tear each other limb from limb. The polished upper-class facade had been entirely incinerated, leaving nothing but the raw, ugly truth of their mutual exploitation. I sat in my quiet, luxurious office on the hillside, watching the monitors with a profound sense of poetic justice. I did not even have to raise my voice. I just had to turn on the lights and let the cockroaches devour each other. Right in the middle of their chaotic screaming match, a sharp, authoritative sound cut through the noise. Ding-dong. The heavy, resonant chime of the front doorbell echoed through the house. The sound was so jarring, and so completely out of place in the middle of a screaming match, that everyone in the dining room instantly froze. Malik stopped punching the wall. Chloe paused halfway to the door. Vivian stopped yelling. Marcus slowly turned his head toward the entryway. He looked terrified, as if he knew exactly what was waiting for him on the other side of that door. He dragged his feet across the hardwood floor, leaving the ruined dining room behind. He reached the heavy oak front door and pulled it open. Standing on the front porch was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a sharp black suit. He held a thick manila envelope in his hands. He did not smile. He did not offer a friendly greeting. He moved with the cold mechanical efficiency of a legal executioner. "Marcus Hayes," the man asked. His voice was deep and carrying. "Yes," Marcus whispered. The man in the suit extended his arm and pressed the thick manila envelope directly into Marcus's chest, forcing him to take it. "You are being served," the man stated loudly. "This is a formal 24-hour eviction notice and an order of asset forfeiture issued on behalf of Vanguard Apex LLC. You have fundamentally violated the terms of your federal trust agreement. You and all unauthorized occupants currently residing within this structure have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises. If you fail to comply, local law enforcement will be dispatched to forcefully remove you and your belongings from the property." Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, staring down at the heavy envelope in his trembling hands. The man in the black suit turned on his heel and walked briskly down the driveway. I leaned forward and pressed a button on my keyboard, officially closing the security camera application. The show was over. The trap had closed. Tomorrow morning they were going to have to look their new landlord directly in the eye. Marcus stood paralyzed in the doorway, staring down at the heavy manila envelope in his trembling hands, as if it were a live grenade. The silence in the ruined dining room was absolute, broken only by the ragged, uneven breathing of my half-brother Malik. Vivian snatched the envelope right out of her husband's hands, tearing the thick paper open with frantic, desperate movements. She pulled out the stark white legal documents, her eyes darting violently across the bold black text. 24 hours! Vivian gasped, her voice barely a whisper before escalating into a panicked shriek. "They want us out in 24 hours. This is illegal. This has to be illegal. No bank moves this fast." She flipped to the second page, scanning for a contact number, a name, any lifeline she could grasp. She found the corporate address for Vanguard Apex printed neatly at the bottom of the eviction notice. Her eyes narrowed as she read the location aloud. "This is not a downtown corporate high-rise," Vivian muttered, her brow furrowing in confusion. "This is a residential address. It is up in the hills of Buckhead. The chief executive officer must be working from a private estate." A sudden, dangerous spark of desperate delusion ignited in her eyes. The sheer audacity of her survival instinct kicked in, overriding the crushing reality of their bankruptcy. She grabbed Marcus by the arm, her nails digging harshly into his shirt. "Get the car keys!" Marcus, Vivian commanded, already marching toward the hallway to grab her designer handbag. "We are not packing a single box. We are going to this address right now. I am going to speak directly to whoever runs this Vanguard Apex company. I will explain that there has been a massive administrative error. These rich elite executives are human beings. They love a good sob story. I will charm him. I will negotiate an extension. We just need to buy some time." Marcus looked like a hollowed-out shell of a human being. He slowly picked up his keys, his spirit completely broken by the back-to-back trauma of discovering Chloe's fake pregnancy and losing his home. Malik was still sitting on the floor, weeping pathetically into his hands over the loss of his white fiancé and his imaginary tech empire. "Get up, Malik," Vivian barked, kicking her son lightly in the leg. "Stop crying over that pale gold digger. We are about to be thrown out on the street. Wipe your face and get in the car. We are going to go save this family." I sat in my luxurious home office watching this entire pathetic display unfold on my secondary monitor through their security cameras. I chuckled softly, taking a final sip of my espresso. I turned off the feed, locked my workstation, and smoothed down the front of my tailored emerald green silk suit. It was time to prepare my grand foyer for visitors. The drive up the steep, winding roads of the Buckhead Hills was a silent, suffocating journey for my family. My father's older sedan struggled against the steep incline, the engine whining in protest, a perfect metaphor for their desperate, failing attempt to cling to an upper-class lifestyle they could no longer afford. The towering canopy of ancient oak trees cast long, intimidating shadows across the windshield. The properties in this zip code were not just houses. They were sprawling monolithic fortresses of generational wealth, hidden behind massive stone walls and wrought iron security gates. In the passenger seat, Vivian was furiously applying a fresh layer of red lipstick in the sun visor mirror, trying to mask the absolute panic radiating from her pores. She was mentally rehearsing the lies she planned to feed the imaginary white billionaire she expected to meet. "We will tell him that our accountant embezzled from us," Vivian rehearsed aloud, her voice tight with anxiety. "We will say that the missed payments were completely out of our control due to banking fraud. You need to stand up straight, Marcus. Project Confidence. Men of this caliber do not respect weakness. If we look like desperate charity cases, he will throw us out. We have to look like temporary victims of a corporate misunderstanding." Marcus kept his eyes glued to the winding road, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like his teeth might shatter. Behind them, Malik stared blankly out the window, his arrogant future CEO persona completely annihilated. The sedan finally rounded a sharp bend, pulling up to the exact address listed on the eviction notice. Marcus hit the brakes. The car jerked to a halt in front of my massive gilded security gates. The sheer scale of the property towering above them was meant to intimidate, and it was working flawlessly. The sweeping modern architecture of the $4 million mansion was visible at the top of the meticulously landscaped driveway. The edge of my infinity pool spilled over a stone retaining wall, catching the afternoon sunlight. It was a residence that radiated absolute unforgiving power. Vivian lowered the sun visor, staring through the windshield with her mouth hanging open. The toxic optimism that fueled her entire existence flared back to life. She turned to Marcus, slapping his arm excitedly. "See," Vivian whispered, her eyes wide with greedy reverence. "This is exactly how real money lives. We have to rub shoulders with people like this if we want to survive. Later, you need to watch your mouth, Marcus. Let me do the talking. I know exactly how to persuade men like this. I will use my charm, explain our business portfolio, and get this eviction completely dismissed. Just follow my lead." Marcus slowly rolled down his window and extended a trembling hand toward the stainless steel intercom panel mounted on a stone pillar. He pressed the glowing silver button. A sleek automated voice chimed through the speaker system. "State your name and your business." Vivian leaned across Marcus, shouting directly into the microphone. She used her most polished, sophisticated high society church voice, the one she reserved specifically for impressing people she deemed superior. "Good afternoon. This is Marcus and Vivian Hayes. We are here to speak urgently with the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Apex regarding a minor property miscommunication. We know it is unannounced, but we guarantee it will be well worth his time." Inside my home, I stood in the grand foyer, watching their vehicle on the high-definition intercom display. I pressed a button on my smartwatch. A loud mechanical buzz echoed through the intercom. The heavy gilded iron gates slowly swung inward, granting them access to their own financial slaughterhouse. Marcus drove the sedan up the winding stone driveway, parking awkwardly next to my pristine custom water feature. The three of them stepped out of the car. Malik dragged his feet across the imported cobblestones, keeping his head down. Vivian, however, was practically vibrating with nervous, ambitious energy. She adjusted her designer jacket, lifted her chin, and marched confidently up the wide, cascading stone steps leading to my front entrance. Marcus followed closely behind her, looking like a man walking directly to the gallows. They stood shoulder to shoulder before the massive, solid oak front doors. Vivian took a deep, shaky breath. She fixed a brilliant, perfectly manufactured smile onto her face, ready to deploy every ounce of her manipulation tactics on the wealthy corporate savior she imagined was waiting on the other side. She reached out her manicured hand to press the illuminated brass doorbell. Before her finger could even touch the button, the heavy oak door emitted a sharp click. The electronic lock disengaged, and the massive door slowly swung open on its silent hinges. Vivian stood up taller, her smile radiating maximum artificial warmth. She prepared to speak, prepared to launch into her carefully rehearsed sob story. Then her smile shattered. It did not just fade. It violently disintegrated, collapsing into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her eyes bulged so wide they looked like they might fall out of her skull. The blood drained instantly from her cheeks, leaving her skin a patchy, terrifying shade of gray. Marcus stumbled backward, his foot slipping on the top step as he let out a choked, breathless gasp. Malik froze his mouth, dropping open in absolute paralyzed disbelief. Stepping out of the shadows of the grand foyer, holding a crystal wine glass and looking down at them from the elevated threshold, was not a faceless corporate executive. It was not an elderly, gullible white billionaire ready to be charmed by their lies. It was me. Vivian stood frozen on my front steps. Her carefully constructed high society smile melted into a grotesque mask of sheer confusion. She blinked rapidly, her eyes darting from the crystal wine glass in my hand to the custom-tailored silk suit I was wearing. Her brain simply refused to process the reality standing right in front of her. The cognitive dissonance was so severe that she defaulted to the only language she knew: insults. "What on earth are you doing here?" Vivian demanded. Her voice was shrill, completely shattering the quiet dignity of my estate. "Did you get a job as a housekeeper? Are you the cleaning staff? Stop standing there posing in your employer's clothes and go get the owner of this house. We have an urgent meeting with the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Apex. Go fetch him right now before I report you for loitering at the front door." My father, Marcus, stood one step below her. He looked at me, then looked at the massive double oak doors, then looked back at me. He swallowed hard. The color completely drained from his face. "Nia," he stammered, his voice weak and trembling, "please do not play games with us today. If you work for this company, please tell your boss we are here. We are about to lose everything. Just tell him we need 10 minutes of his time." I did not raise my voice. I did not break my posture. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my red wine, savoring the rich flavor as I looked down at the three people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. Now they were literally standing at the bottom of my steps, begging for an audience. I reached into the pocket of my blazer. I pulled out a heavy ring of keys attached to a solid tungsten emblem. The emblem bore the distinct, sharp geometric logo of Vanguard Apex. I held the keys out over the top step and simply let them go. The heavy metal hit the stone stairs with a loud, ringing crash. The keys tumbled down, stopping right at the tip of Vivian's designer shoes. "Welcome to my home, Vivian," I said. My voice was calm, cutting through the damp evening air like a surgical blade. "And yes, I am the Chief Executive Officer. I am the sole founder of Vanguard Apex. I am the person you drove all the way up this hill to beg today." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of three massive egos simultaneously crashing into a brick wall. "You are lying!" Vivian shrieked. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are a liar. You are a low-level bookkeeper. You make $60,000 a year pushing papers in a cubicle. You do not own a private equity firm. You do not own a $4 million mansion. You are just a bitter, jealous girl playing a sick prank on your family. Marcus, tell her to stop lying." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us without stepping down from my elevated threshold. "You always were blinded by your own arrogance, Vivian," I replied smoothly. "You spent the last decade mocking my career. You laughed when I stayed up until 3 in the morning, taking advanced financial modeling courses. You told all your wealthy church friends that I was a failure because I refused to marry a doctor or a lawyer. You thought my bookkeeping job was a dead end. In reality, it was the perfect cover to hide my actual work." I watched her eyes widen in pure terror as I dismantled her reality piece by piece. "While you were busy maxing out credit cards to buy designer handbags, I was building proprietary algorithms to analyze high-yield distressed debt. While you were throwing lavish parties to impress people who do not even like you, I was buying up the very banks that held your mortgages. That boring accounting work you despise so much was actually me managing a corporate portfolio worth over $50 million. I did not just build a company, Vivian. I built a financial empire right under your nose, and you were too busy worshipping your golden child to even notice." Marcus grabbed the wrought iron railing to steady himself. He looked physically ill. His chest he heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. "Nia," he whispered, "you own the company that issued the eviction notice. You are the one throwing us out on the street. How could you do this to your own father?" "I am not doing anything to you, Dad," I corrected him coldly. "I am simply enforcing the legal consequences of your own catastrophic financial decisions. You chose to illegally leverage a house you did not own. You chose to let your wife kick me out of the only home my biological mother left behind. You handed me the legal authority to trigger the eviction, and I simply processed the paperwork. Do not stand on my property and play the victim when you handed me the loaded gun." Malik finally stepped out from behind his mother. His eyes were red and swollen from crying over Chloe abandoning him, but his bruised ego was desperately trying to flare back to life. He puffed out his chest, trying to project the intimidating presence he used to bully me in the past. "You set us up," Malik shouted. His voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. "You planned this whole thing. You hacked into our bank accounts and froze my funds. You ruined my life. You chased my fiancé away. You are a sociopath, Nia." I laughed. It was not a warm sound, it was a sharp, biting expression of complete supremacy. "I did not set you up, Malik," I said, staring directly into his panicked eyes. "I did not force you to invent a fake technology startup. I did not force you to lie to your gold-digging girlfriend about being a millionaire. I certainly did not force you to drain our father's equity line, to buy expensive watches and luxury cars you could never afford. You did all of that on your own, because you are a weak, insecure boy, desperate for validation." Malik clenched his fists, taking a step up the stairs. Vivian grabbed his arm, pulling him back. She was finally realizing that making me angry was the absolute worst thing they could do right now. "Please, Nia," Vivian begged. Her voice completely broke. The arrogant matriarch was gone, replaced by a terrified woman staring down the barrel of total poverty. "We are sorry. We were wrong. We handled the room situation poorly. We will give you the master bedroom back. We will do whatever you want. Just please withdraw the eviction notice. Release the hold on the bank accounts. Malik needs that money to save his business. If you are really this wealthy, you can afford to let this go. Have some mercy on your brother." "Mercy," I echoed softly. "That is a fascinating word, Vivian. Let us talk about mercy. Let us talk about what your precious son was actually doing with that money." I looked back at Malik. The momentary flash of anger in his eyes was instantly replaced by raw, unadulterated dread. He knew exactly what I was about to say. "Did you really think I just froze your bank accounts for fun, Malik?" I asked, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet evening air. "Did you really think my financial tracing stopped at your failed cryptocurrency investments?" Marcus looked between me and Malik, profound confusion mixing with the fear on his face. "What is she talking about, Malik?" my father demanded. "What did you do?" I did not let Malik answer. I wanted to deliver the killing blow myself. "When your fake tech company ran out of Daddy's stolen equity, you panicked," I explained, making sure to enunciate every single word for maximum impact. "You went to the dark side of the financial sector. You took out illegal high-interest street loans from unregulated private lenders. You borrowed $300,000 from incredibly dangerous people just so you could keep playing pretend for a white woman who never even loved you." Vivian gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Marcus let out a choked sob, falling to his knees right on my stone steps. "And guess who bought that specific portfolio of black market credit debt this morning?" I asked, a dark, victorious smile spreading across my face. "That is right. My company bought your debt, Malik. I own your $300,000 street loan. And unlike the bank, I do not negotiate payment plans." I reached inside the breast pocket of my tailored silk blazer and pulled out a thick, tightly folded stack of legal documents. With a swift, sharp motion, I threw the heavy stack directly at Malik's chest. The papers hit him with a loud, satisfying smack, scattering across the pristine stone steps and fluttering into the manicured landscaping. Malik scrambled to his knees, his hands trembling violently as he gathered the pages. He stared at the bold, undeniable print. He recognized the names of the underground lenders he had foolishly crawled to when his cryptocurrency investments had tanked. He saw the exact terms of his illegal high-interest street loans now officially transferred and legally notarized under the Vanguard Apex corporate seal. You actually thought you were a Silicon Valley genius, I said, looking down at his pathetic crouching figure. You walked around our house acting like a tech visionary looking down on my accounting job. You are nothing but a gullible fool who got completely played by a gold-digging white woman. Chloe saw a desperate, insecure boy trying to buy his way into a tax bracket he did not belong in. She milked you for designer bags, a luxury lifestyle, and a fake pregnancy, using the money you stole from our family's equity. Malik opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came out. His lips moved silently as his eyes darted over the financial death warrants in his hands. Yao bought an absolute delusion, I continued, my voice ringing with cold, hard authority. You gambled away your father's house to play pretend, and now the bill is due. From tomorrow morning, Vanguard Apex will officially initiate aggressive asset seizure protocols. Every single bank account tied to your name, every credit card, every piece of leased property will be frozen, confiscated, and liquidated. You will not even be able to buy a cup of coffee without my corporate authorization. You are completely and utterly bankrupt. Malik let out a hollow, agonizing groan. He dropped his head into his hands, the reality of his total financial annihilation finally crushing his inflated ego into fine dust. The fake chief executive officer had just been fired from his own life. I turned my sharp, unyielding gaze toward Vivian. She had physically backed away from Malik, pressing herself tightly against the stone railing of my front steps, as if trying to distance herself from the radioactive fallout of her son's massive failure. Vivian's mouth opened and closed. She tried to muster the arrogant, domineering tone she had weaponized against me for decades, but her voice emerged as a pathetic, shaky whisper. Nia, she stammered, gripping her designer handbag like a life preserver. You have made your point. You have punished your brother. But I am still your mother. I kept a roof over your head. I maintained that beautiful house for this family. You cannot just throw me out on the street like common trash. What will my friends at the church say? You are not my mother, I replied, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy register that made her visibly flinch. And you did not maintain anything. I took a slow, deliberate step down the stairs, forcing Vivian to cower even further against the railing. You kicked me out of the house because you genuinely believed I had absolutely no value. You thought I was just taking up space. You paraded around that property for years, hosting your high society galas, showing off the sprawling gardens, and acting like you were the rightful queen of a kingdom you built with your own two hands. Vivian's eyes darted wildly, searching the dark driveway for any escape from the truth I was about to unleash. Did you ever wonder why the property taxes on a house that large never seemed to drain Marcus's modest salary? I asked, tilting my head to study her horrified expression. Did you ever stop to question how you could afford all those luxury vacations, the expensive cars, and the designer clothes while living in a neighborhood with astronomical tax rates? Marcus suddenly looked up from the bottom of the stairs, his eyes widening with a sudden devastating realization. I paid them, I announced, letting the sheer weight of the revelation slam into her chest. For the last 10 years, ever since I got my first major corporate bonus, I have been quietly and consistently paying the property taxes on that house. I funneled the money through an anonymous trust account so you and Marcus could live comfortably. I kept the lights on. I kept the county tax collectors away. That house only remained standing because I secretly injected my own money into it to protect my biological mother's legacy. Vivian let out a small, strangled gasp. Her perfectly manicured hands flew up to cover her mouth. You are nothing but a parasite, Vivian. I said, my voice echoing with righteous, unapologetic justice in the cool evening air. You attached yourself to my father to secure a zip code you could never afford on your own. You lived lavishly off the financial security that my biological mother established and that I secretly maintained. You contributed absolutely nothing, yet you felt entitled to throw me out of my own home. You evicted the only person keeping you off the streets. Vivian began to sob. Real, genuine tears of absolute terror streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She had built her entire identity on being superior to me, on treating me like an unwanted burden. To discover that she had been unknowingly living off my charity for a decade shattered the very foundation of her existence. Her pride was not just broken, it was completely pulverized. I turned my back on her weeping figure, intending to walk back into my mansion and let my security team handle the rest. I had stripped away every single layer of their deception. I had exposed Malik's fraudulent lifestyle, humiliated Vivian's parasitic existence, and reclaimed my mother's property. The surgical extraction of their power was finally complete. But as I reached for the brass handle of my custom oak front door, a heavy shuffling footstep sounded on the stone stairs behind me. Marcus stepped forward. He bypassed his sobbing wife and his devastated son. He climbed 2 steps higher, desperate to close the physical and emotional distance between us. His shoulders were hunched, and his face was a portrait of complete and utter desperation. The man who had spent my entire life avoiding conflict, who had watched silently as I was abused and belittled, was finally forced to confront the monster he had helped create. "Nia, please wait," Marcus pleaded. His voice cracked heavily and tears brimmed in his tired, aged eyes, spilling over onto his cheeks. I paused, looking over my shoulder with an expression of cold, detached curiosity. He reached out a trembling hand, grasping at the empty air between us. "Nia, you are my daughter," Marcus cried, deploying the ultimate desperate weapon of a cornered parent. "I am your flesh and blood. I know I made terrible mistakes. I know I was blind and cowardly. I should have protected you. But you cannot be this ruthless. You cannot have a heart this cold. You cannot possibly bear to push your own family to death." I looked down at the man who had contributed exactly half of my genetic makeup. Marcus was trembling, his eyes wide and completely hollow. He was leaning heavily against the wrought iron railing of my front steps, looking as though the very gravity of the earth had suddenly shifted and threatened to pull him under. He looked small. He looked incredibly fragile. But most importantly, he looked exactly like the coward he had always been. "You want to talk about being my father?" I asked softly. My voice sliced cleanly through the cool night air, commanding the absolute silence of the entire property. "You want to invoke the sacred bond of family, now that you are staring down the barrel of total bankruptcy." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The motion was small, but it made Marcus instinctively shrink back. "Do you remember exactly what happened 3 days ago?" I continued, my gaze locking onto his terrified eyes. "Do you remember when your arrogant, parasitic wife stood over my dining chair and screamed at me to pack my bags and get out of the only home my biological mother ever provided for me?" Marcus opened his mouth, a pathetic wet sound escaping his throat, but he had absolutely no words to offer in his defense. "I will tell you exactly what you did," I said, refusing to let him look away. "You stared down at your plate. You gripped your silver knife and fork, and you stared at a piece of half-eaten steak. You let a woman who contributed absolutely nothing to our legacy throw your own flesh and blood out onto the street just to appease her spoiled, fraudulent son. You chose your silence, Marcus. You chose your comfort over my basic security. You chose her arrogance over my humanity." "Nia, please." Marcus whimpered, tears freely spilling down his wrinkled cheeks. "I was weak. I was so incredibly weak. I thought you were strong enough to handle it. I thought you would be fine on your own." "I was fine on my own," I countered, my voice ringing with unwavering authority. "I was more than fine. I built a financial empire while you were busy playing the role of a subservient husband. But do not you dare try to rewrite history to make yourself feel better. You did not stay silent because you believed in my strength. You stayed silent because you are spineless. The concept of family died the exact moment you took another bite of your dinner instead of defending your own child. You killed this family, Marcus. I am just the one signing the death certificate." Vivian, realizing that her husband's pathetic begging was completely failing, suddenly surged forward. Her face was a horrific mask of smeared mascara and pure, unadulterated desperation. "You cannot do this to us!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking violently. "We will be ruined. The neighborhood will know. The church will know. I will be a laughingstock. You are an evil, vindictive girl. You owe us. We gave you a family when your mother died." I turned my attention to Vivian, my expression shifting into a mask of pure, absolute ice. "You gave me a psychological prison," I corrected her sharply. "And now your sentence is officially up." I raised my left hand and snapped my fingers twice. The sound echoed sharply across the stone courtyard. From the shadows of the manicured hedges flanking my front entrance, two massive men dressed in tailored black security suits stepped forward. They moved with silent, intimidating precision, flanking my front door and crossing their arms over their chests. "This is my private security team," I announced, gesturing casually to the imposing men. "And this conversation has officially reached its conclusion. You are trespassing on my property." Marcus let out a loud, agonizing sob, dropping his head into his hands. Malik was still curled up on the cobblestone driveway, weeping uncontrollably. He grabbed the fabric of his expensive designer jeans, his chest heaving as the reality of his illegal street debt completely paralyzed his nervous system. "Nia, please," Malik choked out between wet, gasping sobs. "The private lenders, the loan sharks, you know what they do to people who do not pay. You bought my debt, you control it, you can forgive the loan. Please, I am your brother. They will kill me, Nia. They will actually kill me." I looked down at the boy who had spent his entire life mocking my existence. I looked at the boy who had tried to throw a $100 bill at my face just 3 days prior. "I am a corporate entity, Malik," I replied, my voice completely devoid of a single ounce of mercy. "Vanguard Apex is a business. We do not forgive high-risk debt. We collect it. I highly suggest you start looking for a minimum wage job tomorrow morning. You have a very large balance to pay off, and the interest rate compounds daily." I turned my focus back to the entire group, delivering my final non-negotiable mandate. "You have exactly 12 hours to return to my property in Atlanta and pack whatever cheap, irrelevant belongings you brought into my mother's house. When the clock strikes 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the local sheriff's department will arrive at the front door to execute the formal eviction order. If you try to take a single fixture, a single piece of furniture, or anything that rightfully belongs to the estate, I will personally see to it that you are charged with grand larceny." Vivian's eyes widened in absolute primal terror. 12 hours. We cannot pack an entire house in 12 hours. Where are we supposed to sleep tomorrow night? Where are we supposed to go? "You can go to the exact same place you tried to send me?" I suggested, a cold, triumphant smile finally gracing my lips. "I hear the basement is available. Or perhaps you can find a nice, affordable apartment down in South Atlanta. Just make sure you lock your doors." "You are a monster," Vivian screamed. Her voice tore through the quiet, affluent neighborhood. "You are a literal demon. God will punish you for what you are doing to us. You are going to burn in hell for this." I turned my back on her, frantic, pathetic screaming. I walked back up the stone steps, moving with the effortless grace of a woman who had just conquered her own universe. I stepped across the threshold of my massive, custom-built home. I looked over my shoulder one last time. Marcus was still on his knees, weeping into his hands. Malik was curled in a fetal position on the driveway, completely broken by the weight of his own arrogant choices. Vivian was shaking her fists at the sky, cursing my name into the cold night air. They had absolutely nothing left. Their money, their home, their fake social status, and their toxic pride had all been systematically eradicated. They were finally forced to face the exact same vulnerability and fear they had intentionally inflicted upon me for decades. "Have a wonderful evening," I said. I reached out and grabbed the heavy brass handle of my solid oak front door. I pulled it shut with a loud, resonant slam that echoed like a gunshot across the property. The heavy deadbolts automatically engaged with a secure electronic click. I locked them out in the cold, dark night, leaving them alone to navigate the brutal, unforgiving reality they had built with their own two hands. I turned away from the heavy oak door and walked straight through the grand foyer toward my home office. The satisfying click of the deadbolts was still echoing against the marble floors. I poured myself a fresh glass of sparkling water, sank deep into my leather armchair, and woke up my security monitors. I brought up the exterior driveway cameras. Outside my gates, the scene was pure, unadulterated chaos. Vivian was aggressively striking Marcus on the chest, her mouth moving in rapid, furious accusations, blaming him for every single failure that had led them to this exact moment. Malik was gripping his hair, pacing in tight, erratic circles on the cobblestones. They finally piled into Marcus's beat-up sedan and sped off into the dark night, racing desperately against the 12-hour countdown I had just initiated. I slept better that night than I had in my entire life. Exactly at 8. O'clock the next morning, my property management team arrived at my childhood home. They were flanked by two armed Fulton County Sheriff deputies. I sat in my office with my morning espresso, watching the live feed from the smart doorbell camera I had installed years ago. Vivian opened the front door wearing her expensive silk pajamas. She looked incredibly haggard, her face swollen from crying, her hair a chaotic mess. She immediately tried to argue. She tried to deploy her usual high society church lady charm, raising her voice to command authority and demand to speak to a manager. But the deputies were completely unmoved. They handed her a court-ordered eviction notice stamped heavily with the Vanguard Apex corporate seal. The deputies informed Marcus and Vivian that they had exactly 10 minutes to grab what they could, physically carry out the door. No large furniture, no expensive electronics, no flat-screen televisions. They were allowed to take only a few hastily packed suitcases of clothes and personal toiletries. I watched as Vivian shrieked and cried, begging the deputies for just one more hour, but the law does not operate on sympathy for financial fraudsters. Marcus simply stood in the hallway, staring blankly at the walls, completely broken. They were escorted off the property, dragging their luggage down the driveway, while the nosy, wealthy neighbors they had tried so hard to impress stood on their manicured lawns, watching the entire humiliating spectacle unfold. Vivian tried to hide her face behind a designer handbag, but the damage to her social standing was permanent and absolute. Where do people with completely frozen bank accounts and absolutely zero credit go? They certainly could not check into the Four Seasons. They ended up driving straight to a cheap weekly rate motel deep in the heart of South Atlanta. It was exactly the kind of neighborhood Vivian had constantly warned me about. It was the very place she had mocked me for supposedly moving to just 3 days prior. I tracked their location through the cellular data on the family phone plan I had been paying for, which I decided to keep active just to monitor their movements. Now the self-proclaimed queen of the suburban country club was dragging her rolling suitcase across a cracked asphalt parking lot, surrounded by flickering neon signs, peeling paint, and the exact demographic of working-class people she had spent her entire life turning her nose up at. She had to stand in a dingy lobby and pay for a room in cash, using whatever physical bills Marcus had managed to scrape together from his wallet. I could see her on the motel security feed I hacked into, arguing with the desk clerk about the smell of smoke in the lobby. The poetic justice of her current living situation was absolutely delicious. The universe has a brilliant way of forcing you to live in the exact conditions you mock others for enduring. But the swift, heavy hand of justice was far from finished with this family. Malik had woken up that morning on a lumpy motel mattress, finally realizing that his $300,000 street debt was no longer just a theoretical problem. I did not keep his toxic debt in the Vanguard Apex portfolio. Why would a legitimate financial institution want to manage an asset tied to illegal gambling and wire fraud? Instead, I bundled his specific loan files and sold them on the secondary, unregulated debt market to a highly aggressive collection agency known for their ruthless physical pursuit tactics. I sold his debt for pennies, fully accepting the financial loss, just to ensure it ended up in the most dangerous hands possible. By noon, two massive tinted SUVs had parked outside the South Atlanta motel. Men in dark leather jackets stepped out holding Malik's freshly acquired legally binding promissory notes. I watched the GPS tracker on Malik's phone ping wildly. He had been looking out the motel window and the sheer panic must have overtaken him. He did not stay to protect his mother. He did not stand and fight like the alpha male tech chief executive officer he always pretended to be. He bolted out the back door of the motel, sprinting through narrow alleyways and hopping chain-link fences. The golden boy, the family legacy, was now a terrified fugitive running for his life from the very people he had tried to impress with his fake wealth. He had to abandon his parents at a cheap motel just to save his own skin. I watched his GPS signal move frantically across the city grid, a digital representation of a coward on the run. My phone buzzed on my desk, pulling my attention away from the tracking software. It was a push notification from a local Atlanta news application. I tapped the screen, and what I saw made me laugh out loud in my empty, luxurious office. It was Chloe, the delicate, supposedly pregnant white woman who had gleefully demanded my bedroom. She had stormed out of the house the night before, taking her fake baby bump and her massive sense of entitlement straight to a luxury hotel in Buckhead. She assumed she could just charge a penthouse suite and some expensive room service to the platinum credit cards Malik had given her. But I had frozen every single one of those accounts the day before. Humiliated, rejected, and kicked out of the hotel lobby by security, she had wandered out into the luxury shopping district the next morning, desperate to maintain her affluent aesthetic. Plastered across the digital front page of the news site was Chloe's official police mugshot. Her expensive blonde hair was a tangled, frantic mess. Her mascara was running down her face in thick, dramatic black streaks. She had been arrested for grand theft after trying to walk out of a high-end designer boutique with a $5,000 handbag shoved under her coat. The news article detailed how the suspect became highly combative with store security. Her credit cards had all declined at a nearby cafe, prompting a frantic attempt to simply steal the luxury items she felt she inherently deserved. She had screamed at the arresting officers, claiming she was a wealthy tech wife and that this was all a massive misunderstanding. She even tried to claim she was pregnant to avoid being handcuffed, a lie the police quickly saw right through when they searched her and found the padded pregnancy belly she had been wearing. The microaggressions, the weaponized fragility, the smug racist undertones she had used against me for years had completely failed her the moment she committed actual undeniable retail theft. She was now sitting in a holding cell at the Fulton County Jail, waiting for a bail payment from a fake billionaire boyfriend who was currently running through alleys to escape loan sharks. I saved the mugshot directly to my desktop. It was a true masterpiece of modern art, a perfect snapshot of a woman realizing that white tears do not work when you are caught on camera stealing a luxury bag. I closed the digital image file on my computer and shut down the monitors in my home office. There was exactly one piece of unfinished business left on my agenda. The physical structure that had housed decades of my misery still stood on that affluent suburban street, serving as a monument to their arrogance. I was not going to let it stand a single day longer. 2 weeks later, I stood on the sidewalk directly across from the sprawling red brick house. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue, offering the perfect lighting for a demolition. The meticulously manicured lawn where Vivian used to host her pretentious high society garden parties was now completely torn up by the treads of heavy yellow construction equipment. I wore a tailored black trench coat, sipping a fresh espresso from a paper cup, feeling the cool morning breeze against my face. The general contractor, a man I had hired explicitly for his company's ruthless efficiency, stood in the driveway and gave me a sharp nod. I nodded back. The massive diesel engine of the excavator roared to life. It was a deep, guttural mechanical growl that vibrated through the soles of my expensive shoes. The heavy steel claw raised high into the air, casting a long, dark shadow over the pristine roof that Marcus had fraudulently leveraged to the brink of disaster. I watched with absolute, unblinking focus as the metal arm swung forward. It smashed directly into the second floor, striking the exact location of the master bedroom. The room Vivian had ordered me out of. The room Chloe had demanded for her fake baby. Wood splintered with a deafening, violent crack. Drywall exploded outward in a massive cloud of thick white dust. Glass shattered from the expensive custom windows and rained down onto the driveway like cheap confetti. The excavator pulled back, dragging the entire front wall of the bedroom down with it. I saw the pale blue paint of my old sanctuary exposed to the open air for just a fraction of a second before the heavy claw came down again, crushing the space completely. The machine moved methodically, tearing into the lower level. It ripped open the grand dining room where Vivian had shoved my dinner plate onto the floor. It smashed through the expensive hardwood staircase where Chloe had stood mocking my clothes. Its heavy treads rolled right over the ground above the damp, unfinished basement where my father had cowardly suggested I live. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness. I did not feel any misplaced nostalgia for the childhood memories buried in that rubble. Every brick falling to the ground felt like a heavy, suffocating chain snapping off my wrists. They had used this house as a weapon to make me feel small. Now it was nothing but a pile of worthless debris. As the demolition crew continued systematically tearing down the rest of the structure, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb right next to me. My lead corporate attorney stepped out carrying a thick leather binder. He walked over and placed the binder flat on the hood of my car, flipping it open to a set of heavily vetted legal documents. We had completely cleared the title, wiped out the remaining fraudulent debt Marcus had accrued, and aggressively reclassified the city zoning parameters for the entire 3-acre lot. "This is the final transfer deed," Nia, my attorney, said, handing me a heavy gold fountain pen. "The city council has already expedited the approval process for the new zoning. The mayor's office is incredibly enthusiastic about your project." I took the pen and looked down at the crisp white paperwork. I was not selling this prime real estate to wealthy developers. I was not building a bigger, flashier mansion just to show off my wealth to the old neighbors. I was executing the ultimate permanent revenge against a family that had constantly mocked my intelligence and belittled my career. I signed my name with a fluid, confident stroke across the bottom line, officially transferring the multi-million-dollar property directly to a municipal educational trust. We were going to clear away the debris and build a state-of-the-art technology and coding academy specifically designed for young Black girls in the Atlanta area. I was fully funding the construction, the computer labs, and the operational endowment straight through Vanguard Apex. While my brother Malik had spent his entire adult life faking a technology career to impress a racist white woman and steal my father's money, I was going to provide actual, tangible resources for young women of color to build real empires. Vivian had spent her life trying to tear down another Black woman just to elevate her own artificial status. I was going to use her sacred ground to lift up thousands of others, erasing their toxic selfishness with pure, undeniable contribution was the most powerful statement I could ever make. Their legacy of greed and manipulation was officially dead. My legacy of empowerment and truth was just beginning. I handed the signed documents back to my attorney. He congratulated me warmly, packed up his briefcase, and drove away. I stood there alone for a few more minutes, watching the excavator flatten the last standing wall of the kitchen. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a slight movement near the edge of the property line. Parked half a block away, partially hidden beneath the deep shade of a large oak tree, was my father's beat-up sedan. Marcus was standing outside the driver's side door. He was wearing the exact same wrinkled clothes he had worn when the sheriff evicted him days ago. His shoulders were completely hunched, pulling his chest inward. His face looked incredibly gaunt, aged 20 years by the crushing weight of his own terrible choices. He stood there watching the heavy machinery mercilessly crush the remains of the house he had sacrificed his own daughter to keep. He watched the physical manifestation of his cowardly life being scraped off the earth and loaded into a commercial dump truck. Vivian had likely abandoned him at that cheap motel the second she realized his bank accounts were permanently empty. Malik was completely off the grid, hiding from violent creditors. Marcus had absolutely nothing and no one left. He saw me standing on the sidewalk looking immaculate and completely untethered from his destruction. For a brief second, our eyes locked across the distance. I did not glare at him. I did not offer a triumphant smile. I just looked at him with the absolute cold indifference you give a total stranger on the street. Marcus raised a trembling hand to his ear, grasping his cheap prepaid cell phone. I saw his thumb frantically tapping the screen. He was dialing my number. He was taking one last desperate shot at redemption, hoping beyond hope that the daughter he had thrown away would answer the call, forgive his cowardice, and rescue him from the hell he had built for himself. I slowly turned my back on him. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. I did not even bother checking my phone. I had already deactivated that old cellular line weeks ago, severing the final digital cord that tied me to their existence. As I started my engine and pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the construction dust behind me, Marcus pressed his phone against his ear. He squeezed his eyes shut, tears streaming down his weathered face as the automated carrier voice delivered the final undeniable truth of his existence. The number you have reached is no longer in service. I sat back in the velvet armchair of my hillside mansion, resting my phone face down on the reclaimed walnut desk. The golden hour sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm, victorious glow across the room. I reached for my crystal glass, swirling the dark red wine, as I reviewed the final asset liquidation reports my legal team had just forwarded. The destruction of their artificial empire was absolute. Marcus had officially filed for Chapter 7, bankruptcy, earlier that afternoon. When the crushing reality of his total financial ruin finally set in, Vivian did exactly what parasites always do when their host runs out of blood. She detached herself. Within 48 hours of being evicted, Vivian filed for divorce. She abandoned Marcus at that cheap South Atlanta motel, packing up her remaining clothes and leaving him entirely alone to face the catastrophic consequences of his own cowardice. Their marriage was never built on love or loyalty. It was a shallow transaction built entirely on blind favoritism, material greed, and toxic superiority. The moment the money evaporated, their family imploded from the inside out. Malik was still a fugitive hiding from violent debt collectors. Chloe was awaiting trial for grand larceny. They had completely destroyed themselves long before I ever swung the wrecking ball. I stood up slowly from my desk, leaving the financial reports behind. I walked across the plush rug and stepped out onto my expansive private balcony. The warm evening breeze brushed against my face. Below me, the sprawling city of Atlanta began to light up, a glittering ocean of electricity stretching out into the horizon. I looked down at the vibrant city, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of peace settling deep into my bones. People often romanticize the concept of family. They tell you that blood is thicker than water, that you should forgive relentless abuse just because you share a genetic link. But family is not about sharing a last name just so they can force you to shrink down to fit their arrogance. It is not about silencing your own voice to make their fragile egos feel comfortable. For over a decade, they looked at my silence and assumed I was defeated. They looked at my modest car and my quiet demeanor and genuinely believed I was a weak, pathetic failure. But my patience over the years was never weakness. It was calculated strategy. It was the crucial time I needed to buy every single brick, every legal contract, and every arrogant breath they actually thought they controlled. I turned away from the sprawling city lights and looked directly ahead, feeling the absolute power of my own sovereignty. I raised my crystal glass, the deep red wine catching the last remaining rays of the setting sun. They told me to pack my bags and leave. They told me I had absolutely no value and demanded I step into the darkness. But what they completely failed to realize was that the darkness they pushed me into was the exact place where I quietly bought their entire lives.